Mr. Scary Studios. Number 1.
Hello, I'm Davey, and I'm here to write about my recent experience with a wacko lady at the coffee shop. I'm using a throwaway to protect my identity. Every Sunday afternoon at 1, I drive an hour and a half down to my favorite low-tier China buffet place. It's something I've done for 2 years now. And sometimes after I eat, I check out the other stores near it. A new coffee joint popped up close to it and had just opened, so after I ate, I checked it out. The coffee place was ran by what seemed to be 2 to 3 women, 2 behind the desk, and 1 woman kept going back and forth behind the desk. I ordered a simple chai coffee and a cookie just to support locally. As I waited for my coffee, I sat down on one of the couches. I noticed that the coffee wasn't made by machines behind the desk, but rather in the room, the one that the ladies kept entering. I again saw her empty it with a cup and exit with a cup of coffee. They then called my name. I paid and revived my coffee and sat back on the couch. The coffee was really good for the most part, but had an interesting aftertaste. The ladies seemed pretty nice and fairly attractive, so I didn't both to say anything. I drank the coffee on a couch and watched Wheel of Fortune. This is where things get bad. I simply cannot remember anything after that. I was told by a gentleman that I was found outside, leaned up against the China buffet, but I didn't wake up there. What I remembered being pinched by a sweaty with a fabulous dress on, but I can't compute in my brain what happened. So bitch that drugged me, let's not meet.
Number 2.
So last summer I booked a camping trip in the next county over. The website looked beautiful. A campsite of 6 large yurts outside a lovely little village. Coincidentally, I had driven through that village before, as it's close to a really nice historic castle I like to visit occasionally. So we pay our money, and my husband, 2 kids, and I pitch up. It's one of the last weekends this summer, and it was lovely weather. The campsite was on a small hill, and the people who owned it lived on top of a hill in their farmhouse. We were checking in on Sunday for 2 nights. As we were shift workers at the time, we passed other people checking out, and they all looked happy. The owners of the site showed us down to our yurt and mentioned that we were the only ones on the site for our stay this time, it being on a Sunday. We were happy with that, to be honest, because with 2 young kids, it meant that we could make noise if they wanted. And we would disturb anybody. Wouldn't disturb anybody. When she showed us around, she did say the yurt door didn't lock, but none of them did. Which, okay, fine, because you don't lock a tent, right? The place was in its own mini wooded area, and it was absolutely beautiful. The owner also mentioned the kids would be safe to wander, because they had perimeter fences because of their dogs. The first night was fun. We had a barbecue, the kids played, and then went down to sleep about 8. I found it hard to sleep, but I often do somewhere new. There was only patchy phone coverage, so we read until we fell asleep. The next morning, my husband seems a bit out of sorts, but I asked him if he was all right, and he was all, "Yep, fine," so I left it. We went out for the day and had a great time. The whole day was blazing hot, and then we got back. Was washing up after dinner and the kids were playing, and a shadow came over the whole place. I felt eyes on me. and it went really cold. Honestly, it felt like something bad was going to happen. I felt dread hit me. We'd already paid to stay, but I pulled my husband to one side and said, "We have to leave right now. I don't know why. I've just got a bad feeling. Please, let's just go home." Now, normally he'd try to talk me out of something like this, but he didn't. He started getting the kids together, and I packed our stuff. We went to the farmhouse where the couple who owned it were sat outside playing with their dogs. My husband started loading up the car, while I apologized to them and explained we needed to leave because our youngest was feeling ill. They said how sorry they were about it, and then just as I turned to leave, the man owner asked if my husband had been outside the house that night, about 3 or 4 in the morning. I said no. He hadn't left my side all night. He asked me if I was sure. By this point, my husband was by my side, and answered that no, he hadn't, and why. "Well," says the guy, "the security lights came on and the dogs started barking. And when we looked outside, there was a man wandering around, who then turned around and walked back down in the direction of the yurts. They assumed it was my husband. We both said it wasn't, and said our goodbyes quickly. I tore out of that place in the car. And then about a quarter of a mile down the road, my husband turned to me and said, 'You're right. I was quiet this morning. I didn't say anything because I thought you'd take the piss. I wanted to use the bathroom in the wee hours. But as I was about to get up, I heard footsteps on the decking outside. Not hooves or something, on 4 legs, something on 2 legs. I lay there as quiet as possible and hoped the kids wouldn't wake up or something. Nope. It still freaks me out."
Number 3.
So I was about 8 years old. I'm a female, and my neighbor was at my house. She was 9 years old. We were playing in the living room, and the front door was open. We had an old screen door, the kind that anyone can rip open easily. The screen was locked, thankfully. The doorbell rings, and my babysitter, who is a very small, elderly lady, goes to see who it was. I follow, thinking maybe it was another friend in the neighborhood. A man starts talking about his vacuum cleaner that has selling. He was selling a vacuum cleaner. He was dressed in a suit and says he wants to come in and demonstrate the vacuum. My babysitter says she isn't interested. The man grabs the screen door handle and tries to open the door. My sister, babysitter, tells him to leave, and he starts saying, "Open the door now. Let me in," he says while shaking the door handle. She closes the front door, and we can still hear him talking outside. She tells us to stay inside for a while. We look through the window to see if he is going to the other houses, but we didn't see him anywhere. He may have just been pushy salesman, but you don't try to open the door in someone's house. I am just glad the screen was locked.
Number 4.
I woke up in a cold room, sitting in a wooden chair. My mind was foggy. Had I been drugged? I had no recollection of arriving here, only of falling asleep in my own second-story bedroom the night before, and of a dream. I couldn't quite remember where I was floating. Slowly I regained some focus. I was free, no restraints of any sort holding me to the chair. I began examining my surroundings, but the room was entirely empty, save for a large boom box perched on a small waist-high table in front of me, within arm's reach. The walls were bare, without a single window, and only one door directly behind where I sat. I got up and tried the door. It was locked. I pushed and pulled, but it refused to budge even a millimeter. I knocked hard, but the sound was almost completely deadened by the solidity of the door. It seemed to be made of solid steel, with the steel frame set into the surrounding center block walls, dashing any momentary hope of breaking through. There appeared to be no other way out of this concrete box, not even an air vent. I yelled for help, but the nearly deafening echoes from my own voice seemed to suggest that there was no chance of my cries reaching outside my small prison. I decided to return to the chair and table and found a previously unnoticed note taped to the boombox. Press play. Drawn in by curiosity, desperate for some answers, and with no time yet to think of another course of action, I pressed the play button. Seconds passed, but there was no sound. This older unit lacked any sort of digital display to indicate whether it was actually attempting to load the first track. I pressed play again, still nothing. I leaned over and put my ear to the player, hoping to hear the whirring sound of a spinning disc when it began. A tumultuous, deafening noise issued forth, sending waves of pain through my entire body. I tried to cover my ears, but it did little to lessen the unending cacophony that enveloped me. Suddenly, a hideous voice began to take shape within the noise, fluttering and discordance, and forcing me to my knees. I fumbled for the volume knob, but it had been removed, and my attempts to twist the small spindle that remained had no effect. The stop, pause, and eject buttons had been crudely pried off, and the electronics underneath damaged beyond repair. Blood began to seep through my fingers, issuing from my ear canals. I sank to the floor in utter despair. Then I noticed, lying on the ground behind the table, a square of plastic. Looking at it longer, I realized it was a CD case. Nearly unable to endure anymore, I removed my left hand from my ear and grabbed the case, hoping for some explanation for why this was happening. What had I done to deserve this? The case had only one word on the cover: Nickelback.